All right, so in the last lesson, we talked about the CAGE system and how to use it to find the root notes all over the fretboard. Now, in this lesson, we're going to talk about the major scale. And the major scale is the most important scale that you can learn because it's the foundation of every other scale. So a scale is just a sequence of notes which is used to create a melody or harmony in a piece of music. And there's a lot of different types of scales, major, minor, pentatonic, harmonic minor, the list goes on and on. But it all comes back to understanding the major scale. Now each scale is determined by its scale steps, which is the distance between each note in that particular scale. And we're going to refer to this as the scale formula. Scale formulas are defined by the size of the jump from each note to get to the next note in the scale. And so, for example, as we talked about in the last lesson, a whole step means you move 2 frets to the next note, whereas a half step means you only move 1 fret. A whole step is the same as whole tone. A half step would be the equivalent of a semitone. So using that measurements, or those measurements of whole steps and half steps, we can create the formula for a major scale. And the formula goes like this: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Or you may see it referred to as tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Both mean the exact same thing. Now, I want you to memorize this formula. Say it over and over as many times as you need and get it ingrained into your brain because it is essential. Okay, so let's take this formula and apply it to the fretboard. Let's start on the 3rd string, which is the G string, open. And from the open G note, let's go following the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Let's go 1 whole step from that G, and that takes us to the A note. Now, just following along on the formula, from that A note, we now go another whole step, and that's going to take us to the B note. Now, from that B note, we need to go a half step, and that'll take us to the C note. From that C note, we need to go a whole step up, and that'll take us to the D note. And then from that D note, we need to go up another whole step. That's going to take us to the E note. Now, in the previous lesson, if you remember, we talked about accidental notes in between the natural notes and how there is no accidental notes between the natural notes E and F and B and C. So from the note E, we need to go up a whole step, and that takes us to the note F sharp. Since the distance between E and F is only a semitone or half step, in this case from the E note, we need a whole step, so we have to go up 2 frets from E. And if you count it, E, F, and then F sharp. And that's why we're on F sharp. And then finally, from the note F sharp, we need to go up a half step, and that takes us to the octave G. So like most scales, the major scale is octave repeating, meaning it will continue the same pattern in higher and lower octaves. So let's play that G major scale on the guitar so you can hear what it sounds like. Starting with the open G note and working our way up an octave higher to the next G note. Now you also need to practice the scale going backwards, starting from the G note and using the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, but in reverse it would be half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. So starting on the G string, we're going to go backwards. We're going to go a half step from the G. That's going to take us back to F sharp. And then from the F sharp, we're going to go a whole step back. That's going to take us to E. And from that E note, we're going to go a whole step back. That's going to take us to D. And then from the D note, we're going to go another whole step back. That's going to take us to C. And then from C, we're going to go a half step back, which will take us to B. From the B, we're going to go a whole step back. That'll take us to A. And then from that A, We're going to take us another whole step back to G. And let's hear that on the guitar. Now, in this example, we were creating a major scale in the key of G, but you can create the major scale in any key. Start on any note and just follow this formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And you can create a major scale anywhere on the fretboard. Okay, so far we've looked at how to play a major scale going up and down on just a single string. Usually, though, when you're playing the guitar, you want to play a scale in patterns. Usually you'll play it in groups of 4 or 5 frets to minimize the movement of your hands up and down the guitar while you're playing lead lines and whatnot. But in order to do this, we need to work out major scale patterns that remain within a single position. So now we're going to look at how to move half steps and whole steps when moving between adjacent strings. So let's start with whole steps. Normally when moving from one string to a higher string, in order to move up a whole step, you move down 3 frets and then over to the next higher string. The difference comes when moving between the second and third string, as the tuning gap between these strings is 1 half step less than the other strings. Therefore, when playing a whole step interval moving from the third string to the second string, you only move down 2 frets. So here's a whole step interval played on the same string. Here's a whole step interval played on the next string. A half step jump is 1 fret less than a whole step jump when moving along a string. So you can see that when moving to a higher string, you need to move down 1 fret further in order to get your half step interval. Therefore, you normally move down 4 frets for a half step. So here's a half step played on the same string. And then here's a half step played on the next higher string. And again, the tuning difference between the second and third strings changes things. So between these strings, you move down 3 frets for a half step as shown. Okay, so knowing how to jump between adjacent strings, between whole and half steps, now we can create a major scale in a pattern. Now in this example, I've identified the root notes as the red notes as shown. So let's start with the G major scale. We're going to start on the 6th string at the 3rd fret, and following the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we move up 1 whole step from that G note on the same string. From there we want another whole step, but we're going to move up to the 5th string, so we need to move down 3 frets to get our whole step to the 2nd fret. From there we want a half step, followed by then a whole step, staying on the 5th string. From there we're going to move over to the 4th string to get our next whole step. And then finally another whole step and a half step brings us to the G 1 octave higher than we started. So let's hear that major scale pattern played on the guitar. Now, so far in this pattern, we've played the major scale in 1 octave, but you can actually extend it out to a 2nd octave across all 6 strings. So let's continue the pattern. This time the root note starts at the 4th string at the 5th fret. And we're going to follow the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So from the first note, the root note, we go up a whole step over to the 3rd string. Then from there, another whole step, staying on the same string. Then a half step, still on the same string. Then a whole step, jumping over to the 2nd string, followed by another whole step on the same string. Then a whole step onto the next string. And then finally a half step, which brings us back to the octave. So as you can see from looking at the pattern, across all 6 strings, we've covered 2 octaves of the same scale. And if you look at the red root notes, you might recognize that pattern, that shape, as being the E shape from the previous lesson when we talked about the cage system. So let's play both octaves, the entire shape, together so you can hear all the notes. So again, referring back to the cage system, we just played the G major scale using the E shape. And we played the G major scale across all 6 strings within that shape, which covered 2 octaves of the G major scale. So there's actually 5 shapes total. And if you remember the cage system, C, A, G, E, D, it's 5 shapes. So now we're going to take a look at the G major scale in every shape that covered the entire fretboard. We started with the E shape, so now we're going to move to the D shape. So starting on the root note on the D string at the 5th fret, and following the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we're going to move up 1 whole step on the same string. And from there we move up another whole step onto the next string. And then a half step on the same string. Then a whole step on the same string. Then a whole step over to the next string, followed by another whole step on the same string. Then a half step on the same string. And that brings us to the octave. Now you don't have to stop the scale there. As you can see, there's room for more notes. You can actually extend the scale even further. We add a whole step, followed by another whole step, and then a half step. Now we can even extend the scale or the shape from the lowest root note on the D string at the 5th fret, and we can go backwards. Following the formula, major scale formula in reverse, we go half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. So from that root note on the D string at the 5th fret, we go back a half step on the same string. Then a whole step over to the A string, followed by another whole step on the same string. Then another whole step over to the E string, followed by a half step, and then a whole step all on the same E string. So at this point in the video, I'm going to try something a little different, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to figure out the next shapes. So far we did the E shape and the D shape of the major scale, the G major scale. So now let's go over to the C shape, and I'm going to let you fill in the notes. And remember, just use the major scale formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And then when you need to go in reverse, you just do the reverse of that. Half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. And I'll show you the shape, and I'll let you fill it in. Take about a minute, and then I'll display the answer. Okay, and here's the notes for the C shape. And now try the A shape. And I'll give you a minute, and then I'll show you the answers. Right, and here's the notes for the A shape. And now try the G shape. And here's the notes for the G shape. So now let's put all those 5 shapes together. And as you can see, it's a lot of notes. But having this system, the CAGE system, and the understanding of whole steps and half steps helps us organize this. Now everything we've done in this video has been within the G major scale. Now these patterns that we see on the diagram, they're interchangeable. They move according to whatever your root note is. So you could take this entire diagram and move it up or down to whatever root note you want to play. If you want to switch it to the key of A sharp or D flat. And the fingering patterns that you see here would be exactly the same. So there's no new fingering patterns to learn anytime you switch to a different root key. So just take some time and practice this. Pick a root key to play in, say, for example, G, as shown here, and find your root notes using the CAGE system, and just practice these patterns in each shape, the C shape, A shape, G shape, E shape, and D shape. And over time, this will just become like second nature. You won't really even have to think about it. And with the major scale, it's very apparent when you hit a wrong note. So let your ears be the judge of what you're doing. You don't necessarily always have to look at the patterns and visualize everything. You can just let your ears dictate where your fingers move, and you can always tell if something's off. So to end this video, I decided to add a backing track that I created that'll work with this G major scale. And it's just a simple progression on piano, bass, and drums. And you could just do a lead pattern using nothing but the G major scale, and it will work with it. Just a good way to get you familiarized with the scale and just moving around the fretboard. And I'll first demonstrate my little improv that I did for it, and then I'll let it play at the end, and you guys can just have some fun with it. And when you're improving, don't feel confined to just play in one shape. You can, sort of move around between the different shapes. Do something within the C shape and move your way into the A shape and G shape. Just be creative. Find ways to connect all these notes together and be expressive with it. Add bends and slides and harmonics, whatever you want. Okay, so the entire lead section was based on nothing but the G major scale. Added a couple little extra things in there, some pentatonic licks, and I think there was a couple flat and third notes to make it kind of minor, but for the most part, this was all G major. So now you give it a shot and see what you can do to it. Again, I'm leaving the diagram up on the screen for you to show you all the notes of the G major scale in all 5 positions across the fretboard, and I'll kind of give you like a cheat sheet while you're improvising. But yeah, practice around with the scale and give this little backing track a shot. All right, so this is going to wrap up the lesson. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching.